You had a session at South by Southwest where you focused on the social MRI. What is that exactly?
So the social MRI is something that we developed at the MIT Media Lab under the Human Dynamics group that's led by Sandy Pentland. And the MRI itself is my own PhD work there. The analogy is the medical MRI. So we have in the medical world, we have MRI and fMRI, which in parallel, the MRI is probably one of the best diagnosis tools in the world today that allows you to look at the living human being and look at how things are flowing in the system and help diagnose to a level that you can't do anywhere else, probably. The functional MRI, the fMRI, is actually an experimental technique where somebody inside an MRI is being shown different stimuli or interventions. So the social fMRI, or social MRI, stands for mechanism design and relationship imaging, which by amazing chance comes down to MRI. But it's actually taking these ideas from the medical realm and actually, instead of doing it in a chamber, we're actually using today's smartphones. The smartphones in our pockets can actually sense dozens of signals that we're not usually tapping into. But sort of today we can actually open that up and sense these dozens of signals about how we live our lives. And if you think about it, the three things you take with you when you go out of your home is your keys, your wallet, and your phone. So it's always with us. And in aggregate, we can actually use the phones in many people's pockets as a sort of a virtual imaging chamber. So one aspect of the social MRI is this virtual imaging chamber that is collecting tens or hundreds of signals at the same time from the members of the community. And the functional part is where we actually do an experimental methodology where interventions are made. So because we know this community, we can design experiments that are targeted to them, do something with them, let's say a fitness game or some sort of social mechanics or motivation thing, because we knew them before, and we can actually look at the effects of that intervention. And if we had just done it as a regular experiment, we wouldn't see all the context of their lives.
I see. All right. So you can get in there and manipulate it a little bit.
So the interesting thing is that the phone can actually sense your real-world network, not just your Facebook or online social network. You can actually sense with two phones the fact that we're face-to-face right now using the Bluetooth scanner.
Right.
So the idea is that we can understand a lot of things in the real world and construct multiple networks for the same people. Because the point is that our call log network or our Facebook doesn't influence our lives, all of our lives. But if you look at the face-to-face network and the friendship network and the call log networks that is spanned by who calls who, and you can look at the online social network, you can actually construct multiple levels of networks for the same people and actually see how information flows, how friendships are made, how decisions are made in that community. And what we've done is actually an experiment testing and deploying this methodology, which was called the Friends and Family Study, where we took a residential community of families. About half of them had children and half of them don't, but all of them are sort of couples. And we gave 150 of them phones for about 15 months. And in those 15 months, we collected more than 1 million hours of continuous sensing data with their consent. And because it was done at MIT at a university, it was all under the ethics committee and everything was protected and scrubbed. And my own data is actually there because I wanted to feel comfortable with whatever is done with the data. So my own data through the whole time is collected into this same database and it's there right now. So sort of I feel okay about what's being done with that type of data.
Sure. So what kinds of data does this study allow for that you just couldn't get from other ones? It sounds like, by having the phones, there's this kind of passive data acquisition that's able to happen. I mean, is that really the core here that you just couldn't get from any other type of experiment?
So the core here is that it's a combination of many, many signals at the same time, together with active input from the participants themselves. So actually, every day they answered a 5-question simple questionnaire about how you feel today, how much you had to sleep, how well you ate, how much you socialized. And every week they answered other types of questions about whether they were sick or not, or they had travel. And once a month we also had a monthly survey where we asked them about how they feel about every other person in the community. So we actually got their self-perception of how close they feel to everybody else. And we had other interesting questions that are, for example, personality types and other types of information that you would never think of just gathering randomly, all at the same time for the same people. So we have all of this human input together then with all the things we can sense from the phones and a Facebook plugin that we had as well in that study. And so merging them together, you can actually try to learn how patterns are actually indicative of personality types with all these input that they enter, both manually and automatically. And one of the things that we see is that using the automatic tools, you can predict a lot of the things and actually teach a system to learn the things that were entered manually.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah. And sometimes it's interesting that people's perception is not as effective as what you sense from the phone.
Is that right?
Because people, if you ask people who you met this week, they'll probably not remember, because our memory is a bit skewed.
Yeah.
But the phones can actually remember who they saw around them during that week very accurately. And one interesting thing that we tried to look at is, which was hard to get any other way probably, we wanted to see how you're influenced by your social network about, for example, app installations. Because it's a decision you do in your life. You decide to install an app.
Sure.
Did you do it because you searched the marketplace, or did you learn about it from a friend? Or we tried to see, is there a connection between the degree of closeness, both in the self-reported network and in the proximity network that we measured with Bluetooth.
Yeah.
We saw that in the self-reported network, there was no correlation. Actually, you had less in common maybe with the less apps. We just looked at the apps that you had on your phone, with you and your closest friends and strangers. And we could see that there isn't a really emergent pattern. But if we looked at the time you spent physically with people, which you didn't necessarily say are your friends, you just were exposed to them in the same area. It could be that your kids are playing together in the playground and you're just there. For some reason, there was a correlation, a high correlation between the apps that you had versus strangers, with people that you didn't spend that time.
Really?
That was a very interesting thing. And then you can take it to directions of understanding marketing or understanding influence.
Yeah.
Because it could be that 10 strangers might influence me more than my best friend.
Right.
Now the question is why?
Yeah, that has some pretty profound implications when you start answering that why. So how do you see this data being applied? Theoretically and practically speaking.
So this data set is probably one of the deepest condensed data sets for a single community almost ever done in history. This allows us to look at these intricate changes and things about people's life that you couldn't otherwise. There is, for example, the Framingham Heart Study, which is a very famous study that has been done for the last 50 years.
Yeah.
And it's been getting amazing insight into health and genetics and even decision-making in life. And the spread of fatness, fat people befriend fat people, or smokers.
I remember
like
the
this.
results on that, yeah.
But in that study, the sampling was once every 3 years. They had a questionnaire. So if you think about it, in those 50 years, they had about 8 samples of data. Think if you did this for 50 years with continuous data collection. Think about the amount, because you ask a person every 3 years who their friends are. Think about if you actually looked at who they spend time with, who they eat with, who they go out with, how these change over time, how your life changes when you have a baby before and after.
Sure.
You can actually capture that. So this is sort of an example, and hopefully this will be duplicated in many other aspects. But I imagine, at some point there could be, again, it's a donate your data to science type of experiment where you allow us insights about what makes us human.
Right.
That's sort of in the research aspect. And you can look at how do we create tools then. What happens when you show people their own data, which was part of our experiment? When you look at your data, how does it change your next behavior? If I show you your sleep hours for the last year, how will it change your sleep tomorrow?
Right.
And what if you see your friends? And you can compare. And then we did all of these types of interventions. Already now, so what we've decided to do is, again, this experiment was sort of a proof of concept of what you could do. And the data set itself will probably be analyzed for years to go. And I'm assuming several PhDs will come out of that data.
Sure, right.
But this is the methodology. And then we also built the system to collect the data. And we decided to open source it to allow anybody else to actually download this and collect data in the same way. Sort of reduce the barrier of entry to collecting this very smart and intricate data without killing your phone's battery.
Sure.
And also preserving the privacy of the user. So the idea is that we have open source services now. We open source this platform. It's called FUNF. And it's sort of a framework that allows both end users and researchers and new developers to build apps on this. So a user can actually download an app from the Android market and actually look at their own lives and collect their own data, save it, and send it to their email or to anybody they want, and actually look at their own data and understand their life better. It's part of the quantified self movement that's coming up. Researchers, even non-technical researchers, can actually go on the web and actually click a few options and create an app that's tailored to their experiment and sort of duplicate the exact experiment that we did in other settings. You could think about medical experiments where they look at change in behavior of somebody with, let's say, Alzheimer's and the deterioration of their movement and changes. So these signals will allow you to actually look at that over time and maybe find predictors for the deterioration in situation, or the people are getting sick or something like that. You can think about economics games that you can do with this, just understanding dynamics of a community. And then the lowest level is for developers. This would sort of democratize doing smart applications that are aware of the phone's context and the user. So you can take FUNF as a development kit and embed it in your apps. And immediately you'll be able to tap into all the richness of data on the phones. So this is where we're hoping sort of to just open it up. So not just the big players in the market could develop apps like this, but any student sitting at home could put an app on the marketplace that is much more intelligent and smart that they can do on their own.
So is it across platforms?
So right now it's mainly for Android,
Yep.
which is again, as far as our cost benefit, Android
Sure.
is such an open platform that
Yeah.
made it very easy to do it. We have several other institutes and contributors to this open source project that are thinking of taking it to iPhone and other platforms.
Yeah.
But because they're not as open, you can't do as much background continuous collection.
Sure.
We have several hundreds of developers already building on top of this, and this project actually won the South by Southwest Accelerator competition as sort of a non-profit pitch. And then since then, it's just been exploding with excitement, and we've seen this excitement, and we've sort of decided to quit whatever we're doing in life and just continue the next few years to actually help others do these types of experiments.
Now, do you anticipate, in regards to the core data set, that people are going to simply be adding to that data set, or do you think that there will also be, separate experiments where a new data set is being acquired?
So as far as privacy, you have to be really careful when you do things like this. Our core data set is sort of under the MIT ethics guidelines, and it's very easy. It's not open to the world because if you can identify somebody there, it goes against the ethics or what we want to do. Whatever you do with this, you have to do very carefully and publish aggregated and anonymized data. So the way we've built this framework is that you can just collect data wherever you want in your own silo. Nothing comes to us.
Okay.
I can still imagine a place where people might donate some of that data anonymously to science or to the city, and you can actually have maybe civics websites that can actually get a picture of the mood in a city, the movement in a city. You can think about situations where there's a disaster scenario and networks are down, roads are down. Just by having this in the pockets of people, sending where they're walking, so you know that there is a road there. This phone can sense around it the communication networks that are up or down, and you can actually crowdsource in real time a map for that disaster area. If people, again, install the app or press a button to donate that data in that situation. So I can imagine, again, if people trust this, it's very important to trust this sort of framework and understand what's being done with it. And that's why it's open source, because you can see what's being collected. I can imagine this coming up in many different contexts of crowdsourcing and civic community or contributing to science.
What about historical data? So if I decide that I want to opt in and I would like to donate my data, can I donate the last 60 days, 90 days, 180 days, or is it I can start donating from that moment on?
It's from the moment you install the application that does this collection in the background. Some of the data could be logged by companies giving you services, but again, you don't own it.
Right.
Part of the idea is to give it to you. You choose to collect it, you choose to own it, and you choose what to do with it.
So it's very much an opt-in in that
It's an opt-in completely.
Okay, great. So last question I had for you. What are the people or projects that you're following these days? So
I generally like to follow projects that take power of big corporations or governments even and give it to the people. So a big example is the quantified self community, that once we have these computational powers in our pockets that used to be a supercomputer, what do we do with the data? So the whole quantified self community that is taking ideas from corporates of data mining and actually optimizing the company and improving revenue, doing it to themselves to improve their health, to improve their life, and taking these technologies and again, commoditizing them. I also like a project, there's the OpenSat project, open source satellite, allowing every person to actually build their own satellite. So think about it, it's the power of governments in the hands of people. So I'm really all for these types of things that flip sort of the pyramid of power and let us do things that were considered out of reach.
Interesting, right. Well, thanks so much for being with us. Appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you very much.